Phil Matier and I asked former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown about the Trump administration and those issues surrounding first-class travel.
Well, unfortunately for Mr. Trump, all of the people connected that he appoints are similar to what he is. And all their lives, they've been doing those things. And it's very difficult to go back to being normal, like ordinary people. You know, you just don't do that. It's just not natural.
Yeah, nobody wants to fly business class after first class.
That's right.
But it seems like he brings in sort of a skeleton crew. It's not clear he even has the personnel to distribute ethics guidelines and all of the things that you need to run a big organization like that and rein people's spending in. It's not clear they got good direction.
But I don't understand this. I can understand when Trump brought in various people from the private sector and said, okay, now you're running a federal department, and they are still thinking that it's the private sector and it's private jets and perk. But this guy Pruitt, he's the former Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma. He should know better.
Not at all. Oklahoma doesn't have any ethical laws. What are you talking about? This guy's been doing exactly what he was doing, Phil. And people tend to do that. When you appoint them, no matter what the instructions are, most people don't read the instructions. Most people continue to learn.
But they've got to have the political savvy that the #1 rule is you don't embarrass whoever it is that appointed you.
Especially when the person who appointed you is trying to drain the swamp and save money for middle Americans and save people's tax dollars, how hypocritical that is and how that flies in the face. However, if there are no repercussions, then if there's no enforcement, then what's to stop people from taking first class?
You got to understand, people do not change their habits because they get a new title. They continue to do exactly as they've always done in life. Whether they were the Attorney General of Oklahoma or not, they still do exactly wherever the title might be. And that's what Mr. Trump is plagued with, including himself. And after all, he sets the standards.
So now, Melissa, I fly economy. I could not get used to flying first class. I wouldn't do it. Once you get used to something,
I'm so glad this is on tape because we're going to use this later. I have a feeling Mayor Brown is not a stranger to first-class travel.
No, well, to bring it, I don't think anything we say is going to change what Mr. Trump thinks or does, or his staff. But time and time again, we were doing a story one morning, in fact, Phil was, on people should be using mass transit. Of course, we should. We all should. But he was talking at the time to Ed Lee, and Mayor Lee was saying everybody should get out of their cars and onto the trains and onto the buses and Phil said, "And how did you get to work this morning?" And I goes, "Well, not me, essentially." And
a big black SUV. That's how he gets to work. That's
so
how he got. That's how the mayor would get around.
Yeah. Well, I don't think nothing's going to change terribly soon.
Phil and I asked former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown what are his thoughts on what type of person Donald Trump is going to name tomorrow.
I think he will name someone that won't get him in trouble. That's why I think he'll look at persons in particular who've clerked for Supreme Court justices, particularly like Anthony Kennedy. And therefore, I think of the first two that he's going to do, one is going to be from the school of Anthony Kennedy.
Well, and Judge Kavanaugh from the D.C. Circuit was a clerk for Kennedy, and there's some speculation that sort of in exchange, maybe formally or informally, for Kennedy's resignation, there was maybe a promise, implied or explicit, that he would be replaced with someone very similar to himself, someone like Judge Kavanaugh, who came up sort of in the Kennedy mold, clerked for him, et cetera.
And they also have one more little thing, and that is Clarence Thomas is toying with leaving the court. That may be where, after a bit of seasoning for the religious right candidate, in this case the woman, Barrett, they get an opportunity to make that appointment in the next term.
Overall, these candidates that you've seen listed, let me be blunt, how clean are they? I mean, you never know if there's a surprise, but if any of them go in front of an approval process, what can the Democrats hit them with?
Well, I mean, so Judge Kavanaugh, for example, he's a D.C. Circuit judge. He's ruled several times against agencies like the EPA and in favor of the administration. That district just does a lot of federal agency stuff, so he's got a very long track record in sort of supporting conservative beliefs about the reining in agencies and having a limited role.
That's not going to stop anybody from getting appointed.
He does not have a terrible record on abortion.
In fact, you got to know that he's been around now for a long enough period so that every facet of how you'd ask him for an answer, he could give you a demonstrated answer.
They can all do just about all do that.
The thing is, he's been on a short list for several.
Are you guys betting that it's Kavanaugh?
The betting markets actually say that it is Kavanaugh. He's got a 41% chance if you look at European betting markets. So they believe it's going to be Kavanaugh, but he's been on a short list for the Supreme Court for many years. So I think he's been vetted over and over again by various Republican administrations.
Are you betting on Kavanaugh?
I am, and because I don't think there are any surprises in his case. There could be surprises in Barrett's case, however, because she has not been around long enough, and I don't believe the justices are going to be able to get away henceforth as candidates of saying, I can't answer because I may have to rule.
You mean the European betting community takes bets on who the nominee is going to be?
Oh, yes. You can bet on just about anything
Apparently so.
in Europe. And there's really, really fascinating. I know a couple of people who lost a lot of money when Donald Trump got elected.
So I can only imagine. The announcement's going to be made when?
It's going to be made tomorrow at 6 p.m. Of course, prime time. We're going to do this exactly when it needs to be done. I'll tell you, Dianne Feinstein was asked specifically at that Planned Parenthood event what Democrats could do to prevent whoever the nominee is from getting the nomination, and she essentially said there's nothing they can do if Republicans go forward with this process prior to the midterm elections. That's sort of the only bet they have is to try and retake the Senate in the midterm elections, which they may or may not get a chance to do.
Well,
so even she didn't really have much in the way of a plan.
What are the odds that the decision is not made until after the midterm elections?
Very, very slim.
Very slim, okay.
It's going to be taken up. It doesn't have to be. It's not subject to a filibuster, so it can be taken up at any time. And they just need that 50 votes plus one. And don't forget, the vice president can break a tie, so they could even actually stand to lose some Republican votes there.